Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Tonic Accord, and hello, everyone continuing to watch you live tonight. We're going to be talking about something that's pretty heavy but incredibly important. It is the war in Yemen. This is actually what the UN calls the single greatest humanitarian crisis facing the globe today, and that's significant given we're kind of still in a pandemic. So we're going to be looking at what is going on in Yemen, who are the players in this international crisis, and kind of the history behind that, and how, perhaps from an American perspective, the Biden administration will deal with its policy regarding Yemen going forward. This is a pretty tough a tough pill to swallow, but I want to give a little bit of context for those watching. The civil war in Yemen started around 2014, 2015, kind of following the failure of the Arab Spring to bring real institutional changes. A president was ousted. His name was Ali Abdullah Saleh. He was the president of Yemen, and he was ousted by the Arab Spring revolt. But then a new government was put in, backed by a Saudi-led coalition, which didn't really change the elites in charge, which led to a rebel group called the Houthis fighting against the Yemeni government. So contained within Yemen, you have a civil war between the Houthi rebels and the established Yemeni government. The Houthi rebels actually hold control of the capital of Yemen. The real problem is larger than this, larger context around Yemen, which is the Houthi rebels are supported by Iran. The Yemeni government is supported by Saudi Arabia and a few other Arab coalition allies. And this has led to a proxy war, which has lasted 5 to 6 years now, has resulted in hundreds of thousands of deaths, the displacement of millions of innocent lives, and as well as you're now looking at a famine that is putting somewhere between 11 and to 17 million people in hunger. So a serious humanitarian crisis, and I think it's one that I think a lot of people don't even realize is happening. So we wanted to definitely get into it today. Alex, it's been going on since 2015. What have you heard about the war in Yemen from media and mainstream news sources in the last 5 years?
Well, I mean, I've heard it's the biggest disaster that no one's talking about. It's completely despicable and sad. And I think my biggest takeaway from that Al Jazeera video that both of us watched that kind of highlighted the background was when they talked about basically humanitarian aid has become a political weapon. They were talking about how the Houthis and the Yemeni government that's backed by the Gulf States coalition, both sides are blocking humanitarian aid to the people who need it. So this is not like there's one good side and one bad side. This is not black and white. It's kind of just pure evil and religious division and sectarianism gone rampant. And I don't think this crisis stops until we kind of face the main culprits, which are Iran, Saudi Arabia, and the U.S.'s sad relationship where we're kind of in bed with the Saudis. And to me, it seems that both countries, especially Iran and Saudi Arabia, just have growing ambitions in the area. And I think it's just going to get worse, unfortunately, before it gets better.
Yeah. Seems to be a common theme in international relations, which is if you find me a small civil war and I will tell you who's really at play, right? It's almost like, this happens all the time. I mean, Vietnam, Korea, right? These major wars that we look at through history are viewed through the lens of larger powers, larger regional or at times global powers vying in a proxy war. They are less analyzed in the realm of the individual, like the person in Yemen who, may not be a Houthi rebel or a Yemeni government supporter and simply wants to live a normal life, right? But the reality is these wars are driven, more often than not, are driven by larger foreign powers. And so the one here is, like we just mentioned a little bit, you have the Gulf states, Saudi Arabia, and among the other, oil emirates, I guess you could call it, that are in this Gulf region. They want to maintain control over Yemen. And I believe I always get them confused, but Saudi is Shiite, right? Or am I getting that wrong? I always flip them. I know it's Sunni and Shiite, and I know that one is with Iran and one is with Saudi, but
So the Houthis are with Iran, and I think Iran's Shia. Yeah.
Okay.
Iran Shia. So the Houthis are the Shia rebels. So I think Saudi Arabia is Sunni, to be
Sunni, right?
completely.
So you have a Sunni backed, Gulf nations backing the Yemeni government to make sure that it's Sunni, that it's also willing to play ball with whatever these oil boys want. That was one of the main reasons right after the failed Arab Spring. The reason we say it was a failed Arab Spring is because whatever person was ousted by these revolts, usually and pretty much 9.9 times out of 10, they was replaced with other elites, other religious figures or banking elites, right? Like not really much of the people felt a structural institutional change. And Saudi Arabia is the reason that there was not any structural change in Yemen after their Arab Spring. Saudi Arabia replaced it with pro-Saudi elites, and that's kind of been the norm in the Yemeni government. Whereas Iran, which is a non-Arab Shia Muslim nation, is also vying for power in the region, has backed the Houthi rebels, which are Shia Muslims as well, and now will support them with guns and weapons and missiles to support their war. And so if you look at outside of Yemen, it's who's vying for political power in the region. And you had a great article about that, so I definitely want to throw it back to you. Tell us a little bit about who are the big boys in the region that are why is Yemen so important to Iran, Saudi Arabia, and perhaps others like Turkey?
Yeah, that's a great segue, because my next point was to be that I actually think the Trump administration did a good job of one thing in the Middle East. They helped Israel establish relationships with some of those oil Gulf countries like Bahrain and the UAE. I think the Abraham Accords were actually probably Trump's biggest foreign policy success. But the problem is that we were so focused on these agreements, which were actually pretty likely because they're all kind of wealthy, more secular countries. But the problem is the Trump administration, and I would probably argue the Obama administration as well, kind of turned a blind eye to some growing, more nefarious actors in the region. That foreign policy article you mentioned, I think, is really good because it talks about how prior to this, the last several decades of Middle East foreign policy, conflict, politics have all kind of centered around chaos and conflict with a lot of the Arab actors, between Syria, Palestine, Lebanon, just to name a few, Saudi Arabia. But now it seems like there's a power shift where some of the biggest actors are some of these non-Arab actors like Turkey, Israel, and Iran. And that foreign policy article talks about that, is how we're seeing Turkey, Iran, and Israel now are starting to try to see what they can get away with in the area. And this puts me to a kind of a more philosophical question, which I'll maybe turn back to you on this, is that, we did an episode last year about Thucydides' trap and the U.S. and China. And I was thinking today when I was out on a ski, I was like, could Saudi Arabia and Iran be the next Thucydides trap, where you have Saudi Arabia is getting desperate because they see this growing Iran? And for people who don't know, Thucydides trap is just this idea of kind of a waning superpower sees a rising superpower, and they're kind of forced to go to conflict because the balance of power in the region or world changes. And I just wondered, Drew, do you think maybe we could be seeing that happening here, and Yemen's just the battlefront for it?
I think it's absolutely happening. I think that's exactly what's going on. Is Yemen is the chessboard, is the and like you said, Thucydides' trap, which is again a great episode for those watching. Check out our episode on that political concept. The idea that I think Saudi Arabia does not want Iran to overpass its regional power and vice versa, and then both of them don't want Turkey and Israel to overshadow their regional power. But they all kind of need to be in bed with each other a little bit. Maybe not Iran and Saudi Arabia, but Saudi Arabia's already, gotten in bed with Israel and Turkey a little bit so that they can gain their own power. It's this complex of, web of, these guys all want to be the top dog, but they kind of need each other a little bit to get ahead. And then, of course, you have even non-Middle Eastern states like Russia, China, and the United States all being players, kind of farther away players in this as well. Let's dive into how the United States has been involved with some of these major players. So, Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia is one of those countries where I think like every political spectrum like every American political spectrum at some point hates Saudi Arabia. Like if you find the progressive leftists, they're gonna hate Saudi Arabia for the women's rights things, the Khashoggi killing, right? But then you're also gonna find like I even find the most like gun-toting truck driving Republicans. They're just like they hate Saudi Arabia as well because giving money to the Saudis, like those backwards ass people. It's funny to me how in bed America is with the Saudis, despite how I think publicly, like I bet you if you took a public opinion poll about people, do you want to be allied with Saudi Arabia? I bet you a vast majority of Americans would say no. But the reality is, since 2015, arms deals to Saudi Arabia, and they've been going on longer than that, but arms deals to Saudi Arabia since 2015 were found to be linked to Saudi bombings in Yemen. And because the United States has a, partnership with Saudi Arabia, and we definitely don't want Iran to gain any power, we decided to help Saudis and provide them with arms to bomb the Houthi rebels. That was at least the idea. So the problem is we give them bombs, we give them missiles and weaponry to attack the Houthi rebels, but then the problem is Saudi Arabia uses them against civilians. So this is where these thousands and thousands of civilian deaths have come into play, where Saudi Arabia had bombed, allegedly, and I think it's true, they have bombed hospitals, children's schools, education centers in Yemen, with the notion that these were Houthi rebel sites or Houthi military operations, and in reality they were not. And so I just want to say here, Steve Pomper, who was a former senior State Department official for President Obama, said, look, people make miscalculations all the time, but it was striking to me as I reflected on my time in the Obama administration that it wasn't just that we embarked in this escapade, it's that we didn't pull ourselves out of it. So so we obviously got involved. We understood what we were doing was giving arms and weapons to Saudi Arabia that was using it to bomb civilians in Yemen, and we didn't stop. And that's a blight on Obama's administration, and it's certainly a blight on Trump's. Trump was gung-ho in giving Saudi Arabia more arms weapons. He even said, I want Boeing and Raytheon to sell to the Saudis. We want to create jobs, and that was his excuse, was job creation. But what was happening was these bombs were eventually reaching, killing children.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. One thing on Obama's administration in that, I feel like if there was a serious issue with Obama's foreign policy, it was that he was a little bit too idealistic at times, I think. I think that he was never very willing to stick to a red line if it's crossed, or to stand up sometimes against allies or for allies. And I think it's because he thought like he wanted to be pragmatic. And unfortunately, a lot of these more nefarious actors are not trying to work with us for the best interests of both parties. And I would just say on Biden, though, Biden was the more hawkish of the two.
Yeah.
And so maybe the silver lining here is that the Biden administration will put a stronger stance towards some of these things. But I think you're right and very accurate on the fact that this is not an old problem with Saudi Arabia. I think I said this last week, but Trump just did it all more in the open. He made it so transactional, and he was willing to just say all the bullshit, that I think it even put a more negative light about Saudi Arabia to a lot of people. And then the Khashoggi killing, I think, which was back in October of 2019, or maybe even further back, I think that was to a lot of Americans and to a lot of the world kind of just the symbol of what Saudi Arabia stands for.
Yeah.
This was a guy who was in Turkey trying to meet his future wife, and they literally cut him up and dissolve his body in a Saudi embassy in Turkey. I'm curious why the Turkish government didn't do more about it too, but that's a whole other thing. But I think that unfortunately we're in such a weird relationship with Saudi Arabia. It's like, yes, we would lose jobs, but eventually you do have to pull off the Band-Aid, because it seems like MBS doesn't just want to be our trading buddy anymore. He wants to see how much he can get away with in the region, and it seems like it's getting worse and worse, and that's going to mean not just innocent civilian lives of Middle Eastern countries, but that's also going to mean American lives potentially.
Absolutely. I don't think MBS gives a rat's ass about American lives. It's all scratch my back, I scratch your, it's business, right? Also, real quick, what's the flag? I know you have the Spanish flag. Some people in the chat are wondering about the flags you have in your room. What do you see? I know you have Spain. What's the other ones?
Yeah, I was going to wait to answer that, but yeah, so the Spanish flag, I worked there. I had all my students sign it back in the day, so that's that. I have a Czech flag because I'm half Czech, and then I'm a quarter Polish, so I have a Polish flag there as well. I used to have an American flag, but it fell down and is currently out of service. So there's that question, and also Stoic CVV. You are correct. That's why the Turks couldn't, investigate that further on Saudi soil. But they also could have potentially worked with intelligence to stop the Saudis from fleeing the country. Potentially, there's that as well.
So what were we saying? Okay, so yeah, MBS. Yeah, I mean, I think at a certain point, it's like you're right. Like not just a couple of jobs. I mean, billions and billions of dollars in industry, right? I mean, defense contracts, oil contracts. I mean, big capital B billions of dollars of flow of cash to in and out of Saudi Arabia thanks to the United States. That is why. So if anyone's asking, like, why are we still in bed with this asshole? That's why. And so it shows that the pull, the attraction of and the stickiness of these deals goes through administrations. I mean, whether you have a left-leaning president or a war hawk conservative, everyone's in bed with Saudi Arabia. So I do hope that. I don't think it will be Biden. I mean, maybe. I hope I'm surprised. But you're right that he's kind of still the war hawkish of the Obama administration. He's already started drone striking Iranian targets in Syria, right? So, I don't think this will change anytime soon. But if anyone is wondering why we are in bed with this bastard, it's because of billions and billions of dollars of contracts with Boeing and Raytheon and defense contracts as well as oil. It's pretty much how it is. I mean, unfortunately, it is that simple.
Right, because I mean, it is true that, like we have a comment here who says that the U.S. is worse than MBS. Stop sitting here talking about it. I would push back just mainly for the cultural aspects as well. I mean, there are still death sentences for people that don't seem to fit the line of the Saudi government's religious values. Women just were allowed to drive, I think, 2 years ago now. Gay people, you would probably not want to be gay in Saudi Arabia. So I would step back and say, you're right. Israel has issues themselves, 100%. But Israel has, I mean, I'm not even going to get into Israel right now. That is
yeah,
just
dude. I mean, look, you're coming and asking if it's we're pro-Israel. I mean, that's a separate topic. And we have expressed our opinions on the Israel-Palestine conflict. If you are really interested, you can look those up because now we're racist. You don't like Arabs. Okay. So Here's the thing, man, is we're just discussing the foreign policy of the United States foreign policy towards Saudi Arabia and how we disagree with it. We think that Saudi Arabia is engaged in humanitarian crisis in Yemen. You can disagree with that, but I really don't see where you're getting the racism part from. Anyway, we're going to move on. I think that's the main problem is the United States time and time again has decided that, we are willing to overlook humanitarian issues if it's beneficial for our policy goals in the long run. And that has caused us to get into scenarios where we kind of have our hands tied. And this is one of those scenarios. So ideally, we should have never gotten business with the Saudis in the first place. But since we're here, I do think perhaps looking at avenues for energy independence any way we can to get away from Saudi Arabia is a good thing. I do think that, stopping these defense contracts as much as we can or limiting them as much as we can to prevent U.S. military equipment used in Yemen should happen. But how that happens is really hard to say because, again, we talked about just recently because of the Khashoggi report that, Biden administration wants to stop some of the aid to Saudi Arabia for offensive measures. But that doesn't mean we're stopping any of our deals for defensive measures. And all Saudi Arabia has to do is say, well, there's a Houthi rebel. They were planning to bomb us, so we bombed them first. That was defensive, right? A preemptive defensive strike. So even Biden's half-assed attempts at trying to curb Saudi Arabia's power, I still am critical of.
Yeah, definitely. And now this is interesting. What do you think about this? So I saw that the U.S. just removed the Houthis from being designated as a foreign terrorist group.
Hold on, real quick, I gotta ban this guy because he's
Oh yeah.
He's
Yeah, he wants to kill us.
now you're threatening violence, man. Hey, listen, man. You're welcome to disagree with us, but if you're gonna say you're gonna beat us up, that you're gonna get banned. Like I don't know what else to tell you. I don't know what you expected. I'd fuck you up, white boy. Okay, dude.
Oh, this is nice. Okay.
Well, you have a good day, bro. Find a different stream. Okay. So anyway, back to the real conversation at hand. What were you saying about about Biden's attacks?
Yeah, so they removed the Houthi rebels as a terrorist group. So
Right.
do you think, like, in my opinion, that could be a first step of at least not alienating them, where maybe a conversation could be reached, maybe not in the present, but down the road? You know what I mean?
I think it does a little. I mean, it's symbolic. Like again, I think it's to get the headline. Like hey, like the Houthis are not a terrorist group. It's symbolic, but I don't think Saudi Arabia will change their decision making based on America's categorization of the Houthis. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, you're probably right. And there's a guy, Jonathan Schanzer, who is a foreign policy expert, and he wrote in MSNBC's article on this. He was basically saying that, unfortunately, it seems like no matter what the Biden administration does right now, there's probably not a good option. Like, we don't really want to escalate tensions because, obviously, as we've talked about, that's what we've kind of helped do indirectly, and that's not helping. And I don't think pulling out either is the option. So it kind of seems like this is one of those issues where, I know it sounds cliche and simple, but it needs to be done from the inside. And like, my biggest thing is, there was a number here. Let me see if I can find it. I know I wrote it down. It was basically talking about, The Economist said the U.S. spends as much on Egypt's armed forces as it does on aid to the entire region. And the economists argue that since George W. Bush, the main problem is we just keep giving aid packages to these leaders in these countries. Yeah. And all it's doing is just giving them more power, giving them more facilities for violence, and it's not instituting real change. And so, again, like, I think the U.S. from day one has been too involved in this area, and it's just gotten worse to the point where the money we're putting into these countries is just helping the bad guys in these countries. So, like, obviously pulling out's not going to help either. So I don't know where we go from here, and that's just my honest thoughts on it.
Yeah, like so for example, like one is there is a Saudi-backed blockade preventing aid and the flow of goods and services in and out of Yemen. I think that like without like complete, like, I mean, again, if you're having to, I'm coming at this from like if I was Joe Biden and I had a lot of my hands tied, perhaps you can't just cancel a $2 billion Raytheon contract, but what you can do is, I don't know, like try and persuade Saudi Arabia to perhaps they'll get more contracts in the future if they get rid of the blockade. Like, at least get rid of the blockade, right? Like, I see that as a major issue preventing the goods and services and the flow of like medical supplies for the coronavirus. Like the flow of just objects and services needs to go back into Yemen so that people can just live and survive this pandemic and the war. On top of that, I think that utilizing maybe leverage with the Abrahamic Accord with some of with Israel, because the United States has a good alliance with Israel for better or worse, leveraging that alliance against Saudi Arabia to try and just put political pressure to ease tensions in Yemen. Like it will, unfortunately, might have to be like baby steps and stuff. I just don't see a world in which the United States just cuts ties with Saudi Arabia overnight. I don't see that happening. So I'm just trying to think of real solutions. But certainly the biggest problem right now is just the blockade preventing humanitarian aid. Now, another problem you just mentioned is if you can get humanitarian aid in, who does it go to? Does it go to the Yemeni? Does it go to the Yemeni government? They're not going to give it to people in the Houthi neighborhoods. Does it go to the Houthis? How do you ensure a rebel group appropriately distributes humanitarian aid? So I don't know. It's super complex. But now what we're seeing is, immigration issues because Yemeni people are being displaced in the tens of millions. So they're going to places like Israel and Saudi Arabia and Oman and others.
Yeah. So again, I mean, it's such a complicated issue. Is that maybe the more broad, maybe just kind of one of my concluding thoughts here could be that I think the problem is that we're using 20th century models to deal with escalating, diversifying problem that is completely, in some ways, unprecedented. You know what I mean? Like maybe, and obviously I don't have this. This is just kind of a rhetorical question to our listeners, to you, to whoever is. Maybe it's time that we re-examine our approach. We re-examine what it means to support different sectarian groups in the region. Maybe we look at the difference of what some of these new actors are doing, or not new actors, but new actors having power, like Turkey, Israel. Like, there's just so many moving pieces that maybe the paradigm shift is coming. Maybe this is how it begins, is all these growing conflicts and new actors. I don't know, man.
Hey, maybe,
I really don't
or
know.
maybe you do some old school CIA tactics and just like assassinate MVS, put in one of your guys, and hope he doesn't go crazy as well.
I mean, it arguably has worked better than some of these current processes.
I mean, I'm kidding, of course. But yeah. I really, it's disheartening though. I mean, this is one of those topics that is so tough to talk about because it's not easy to find a solution. But there's obviously a problem, and it's one of those things that is, again, just coming from my American perspective. So for an American audience, a lot of people don't know what the hell's going on in Yemen. A lot of people really don't understand that there's one of the largest humanitarian crises in decades happening in Yemen. I mean, people hear about in the past of things like Darfur and stuff like that. Like, this is ours. This is our Darfur. Is millions and millions of people being famished in Yemen because of this war. And it's not even because of... It's because it's a proxy war between two other regional giants. So it obviously shows the complexity of international relations and how much we do need to be attuned to some of these regional players. And it also shows that our media perhaps doesn't cover certain things as much as they should.
Well, I mean, as we've seen with more domestic stuff lately in the U.S., the media covers what they want to cover, and I think for a myriad of reasons they don't want to cover this. I mean, I could understand why they maybe don't. It's a huge blemish on pretty much everyone involved. But again, yeah, like I think it's important to shine light on this, and I do worry that this region is going to just get hotter and hotter because Turkey's involved in everywhere from Syria to Armenia now, Iraq, Libya. And Russia's kind of linked with Turkey everywhere. It's just, I think it's going to get quite hot and bad. And so at least I think we have a president and an administration that are having these conversations and are trying to do something about it. And at this point, that's all I can really say. But I hope that's at least a step,
Yeah, I just hope that, I just see a lot of signaling from Biden that he wants to be tougher on Saudi Arabia. But signaling signaling is air. You know what I mean? Again, like you said, Joe Biden has a history of being the more hawkish Democrat in the Obama administration. So, signal all you want, but let's put your money where your mouth is, and I'm waiting to see that happen. Hopefully it does. But until then, I do hope that this has been informative for you listening. Again, you are absolutely welcome to disagree with us, hopefully in a politeful manner. Thanks for all that watched and followed today. Stoic, again, thanks for the follow. I just saw that popped up. Appreciate you all chiming in, and thank you all for watching. Stay tuned that next week we're going to have more Tonic Accord. So if you want to watch our recorded episodes, go on YouTube, look up Tonic Accord, or you can hit the audio at Podbean. We have years and years of content up there now. And you can go back and look at specific things like our coverage of the Khashoggi killing back when that happened. What else did we mention today that we covered? Oh, the Thucydides trap. You can find out more about that political theory we mentioned today with our episodes. So thank you, everyone.
And we've also talked about Israel. And
yes.
So we are not just pro-Israel nut jobs. I think both of us have a very balanced take on Israel, and we understand it's a nuanced topic. That's my PC answer to this joker who was on here earlier.
Right. So if you want a lot of more nuanced topics, then definitely look us up, the Tonic Accord. Thank you all for listening, and I hope to see you soon.